when we agree to represent somebody, there's a lot of legal responsibilities that go along with agreeing to represent somebody. So if you've read through the chapter, like I hope you did, you learn that in Virginia, we can have relationships that are both client and customer relationships. We can have both client and customer. The client is the person that you've agreed to represent throughout this real estate transaction. You agree to look out after their best interest. Normally, that's what I'm looking for when I ask, what does that mean to represent somebody? Looking out after their best interest. And you know, buyers and sellers, their interests are in complete opposition. Now, with these legal responsibilities, it just doesn't come by accident. The only way to create these legal responsibilities properly or legally is to sign a contract with that individual where they're hiring you to represent them and look out after their best interests. That's a client. Now, we don't have any problem thinking about this when it comes to a seller. This relationship with the seller normally starts by us signing a listing agreement. We meet the seller, discuss selling their home, talk about what we're going to do to market their property, discuss what a good sales price would be, and then we ask the seller to sign a listing agreement. Through that listing agreement, through that contract, we've agreed to represent the seller and look out after their best interest. That's the way we naturally think about it when it comes to a seller. However, with a buyer, it's not unusual that the relationship starts as a customer relationship. By definition, and you might want to write this down, a customer is an unrepresented third party. That's the customer, an unrepresented third party. When I say third party, you and your broker are one party. The seller of the home that you're discussing with this buyer is party number two. That would make the buyer a third party. You're one party, the seller's another party, the buyer's a third party. And when we say unrepresented, here's a buyer that has not signed a contract with an agent, hiring that agent to represent them and look out after their best interest. And this is not unusual to with a buyer to start as a customer relationship. Can't you just see the young couple sitting around their apartment having that conversation one day? And hey, instead of renting, we need to buy our own house. We need to get out of this apartment and buy a house. And the next thing they do is they get on the internet, and they look at Trulia and Zillow, and they look at some listings on the market, maybe even pick up the phone and call an agent or two to discuss a listing, but they've yet to sign a contract with an agent hiring them to represent them. In a sense, this person at this point is representing themselves. That's what we mean by unrepresented. Nobody's out there looking out after their best interests yet. They're representing themselves. They are a customer. But here's what you need to know. And again, write this down. This is one of two very important points to take from this chapter that you need to understand. When the buyer is a customer, we always represent the seller. If the buyer's a customer, whatever property you're discussing with the buyer, your job is to look out after the seller's best interest. Our real estate system is a system of sub-agency, is what it's called, sub-agency. We have agreed, contractually, we've agreed that if we're not representing the buyer because they've signed a client representation agreement with us, in all cases, our job is to look out after the seller and represent their best interests. When the buyer's a customer, we always represent the seller. Very important point. So again, I guess it depends on how you're getting your business. Some agents, you know, I ask, where's your, I guess I'm nosy, I just want to know. I ask them, how do you get your business? And I hear the same thing over and over again, referrals, referrals, referrals. That's the system we preach in the real estate industry, referrals. You help somebody buy a house, you want them to tell all their friends and family about you. So if I got a call one day from a buyer, they're like, you helped a buddy of mine buy a house a couple months ago. He was really happy with your services. I want you to help me buy a house. I want you to be my agent. Well, I'd say, let's meet at my office. We'll discuss the buying process, discuss what it means for me to represent you. And then I need you to sign a client representation agreement with me, hiring me to be your agent. I get a lot of my business from what I call beating the bushes. I'm out there running ads on Craigslist for government-owned homes, just trying to get buyers to call me. I get a lot of calls from buyers I've never talked to before. And if I told that buyer, well, before I show you any properties, you have to sign a contract with me, they're going to say click and go call another agent, right? So it's not unusual if it's a buyer I've never met before, that relationship starts as a customer relationship, me showing this buyer properties. But they need to understand in this relationship that in all cases, I'm representing the seller. So this buyer customer asked me, is that a good price for this house? It seems a little high. Well, if I'm representing the seller, I've got to pretty much honor that price. Yeah, based on comparables in the area, this looks like a pretty good price to me because I'm representing the seller. So I tell buyers, as I start showing them homes as customers, at one point, you need to hire an agent because you need proper advice and guidance through the purchase process. A buyer they have a lot of concerns, but they have two main concerns. They're concerned about the price. Is that a good price for the house? They don't want to overpay. And of course, once we have a home under contract, they're concerned about the condition of the home. And after we do a home inspection, what repairs to ask the seller to make. Well, if I'm representing the seller, I can't give this buyer customer advice on what price to offer or what repairs to ask. So I tell a buyer, at one point you need to hire an agent because you need proper advice and guidance through the purchase process. That buyer would then become the client of the broker.
I just wanted to say this.
Yes.
Whenever we were buying our house, we started off, we got referred to our real estate agent. And we started as a customer, and she never gave us the contract, but we just knew it wasn't right to, waste her time and go to see another agent.
Right,
whenever
exactly.
We spent so much time with her.
Well, the problem with working with a buyer as a customer, you're a volunteer. You can show them homes for this buyer customer for a month. Call this buyer up one day and say, hey, a new home that hit the market. Let's go take a look at it. And they can say, no, thank you. I don't need you anymore. I bought another home from another real estate agent yesterday. Nobody's ever made any kind of commitment to each other. We've never signed a contract. They've never agreed to you being their agent and working with you exclusively, and you've never agreed to represent them and look out for their best interests. My point is, both us, the agency, the brokerage, and the buyer at one point need to sign that. We need that representation agreement. The buyer needs it for proper guidance and advice through the purchase process. And we need that representation agreement to protect our interest, our time that we've invested in this transaction. So we both need the representation agreement. But without the representation agreement, the buyer is a customer, and we're always looking out after the seller's best interest.
So if you were buying or selling your house and then buying another house, would it be wise to have two different agents representing you?
Well, that's your choice. You could do that, but the agent's hoping to be involved in both transactions. But if you don't like the agent from the sale of your house, you really can't be forced into using them to purchase your home, right?
Right.
If you we talk about that in the national book when we talk about antitrust laws.
So is that called dual agency from there?
Nope, that's not dual agency. That's
okay.
Representing that one person on two separate transactions. So
We
love those transactions, and you do. That's what you hope to have happen. The back-to-back transactions. You help them sell their house and buy another the same day, but that's two different representations. One in the sale of their home, and one in the purchase of their home, and both of those would require two different representation agreements. Okay. Just because you signed a representation agreement with them to represent them through their sale does not mean you're representing them with their purchase. That was just for that particular act.
I understand that, but you said that it wasn't in the best interest, or when they're buying the house, if that person is representing them.
There's no conflict of interest there. So yeah, so it's fine to be their agent in both transactions. There's no conflict of interest. There's only a conflict if you're selling their home and you have a buyer for their home, right? That's dual agency where you're involved in both sides of the transactions, but it's not dual agency if they're selling their home and helping them buy another. Okay. Now, so one side of the coin is us fully understanding what position we're in with this this buyer. Are they our client where we're representing them and their best interest, or they a customer and are we representing the seller's best interest? So we need to completely understand. But the other side of the coin is the person needs to understand what relationship they have with us. We learn this stuff in this class, but buyers don't understand. They can just easily assume by your actions that you're representing them. For me, it normally starts with a phone call. A buyer calls up and says, I saw your listing. Can you tell me about it? What's the very first question I should ask this buyer at this point?
Is he working with someone else?
Are you being represented by another agent? Are you being represented? I need to know this for two different reasons. Number one, I'm looking for my next client. This person's not my client yet, but are they somebody else's client? But because if they're somebody else's client, then they're probably not going to become my client, right? If they're somebody else's client. But number two, we need to understand, is this person have somebody looking out after their best interest? We have to ask them this question up front. Are you being represented? Because if they say no, alarm bells should go off. Virginia has what they call mandatory disclosure laws. When we first discuss a property with an unrepresented buyer, we have to make it very clear to that buyer who we are representing. See, if they called me up and said, can you tell me about your listing? And I just started rambling on, wait till you see this family room. It's huge, huge family room, and it's got a great surround system. Man, you're gonna love sitting there watching movies in this family room. You know, the way I'm talking, they might just assume that I'm representing them. So before I start talking, I have to make it clear that I'm not. Before I tell you about my listing, I have to make it very clear to you that I am representing the seller. I am the seller's broker. I'm representing the seller. But wait till you see this family room. You're going to love it. It's huge and it's got a great ground sound system. You know, now I can start rambling on. I need to make that disclosure up front, though. The next thing is they're going to say, hey, that sounds really great. Can you come show me the property? So I drive out to the listing, get out of my car, shake their hand. Here's my business card. Before I can show you this listing, Virginia wants to make it very clear to you that I'm not representing you. You need to understand I'm representing the seller. So before I show you this listing, you have to sign this form. We're going to see this form in this chapter. It's called a disclosure brokerage relationship. It's a very, very simple form. It just says, buyer, you understand I'm the seller's agent. I'm representing the seller. And they sign that form. Now I can show them the property. Now, as an alternative, they can sign the client representation agreement at this point and hire me as their agent. But if this is somebody that's never met me before, they're probably not going to be willing to do that. Make that commitment to me. So I'm going to start this relationship with this buyer as a customer. I'm going to show them this listing. And if you're a smart agent, you probably bought a couple other listings in the neighborhood. Our goal is to spend a couple hours with this buyer showing them properties, so they can get to know us and get comfortable with us. In fact, at the end of the day, I'm going to say, well, you didn't see anything that you look for, but I got a much better understanding of what you're looking for. I'm going to go home, get on the computer, look up some more good listings in line with what you're looking for. Let's get back together tomorrow and we'll look at 5 or 6 more properties. And this is going to go on for a while till this, with this buyer getting comfortable with me. And during this time, I'm explaining to the buyer that I'm representing the seller, and to give you the proper advice and guidance that you need. At one point, you need to sign this buyer representation agreement with me or another agent, but you need to hire somebody. I'm hoping it's me, but you need to hire somebody to get proper representation. But I have to measure how much time I'm spending with this buyer, showing them these properties, because all this time I'm a volunteer, like I said. They have not made any commitment to me, So client versus customer, understand the position that you're in. And the other side of the coin is making sure that the buyer understands what position they're in with us. So number one, to repeat, the 2 really important rules to understand from this chapter is if the buyer's a customer, we always represent the seller. We already said that one. The other important rule to understand is mandatory disclosures. We always disclose who we represent to the party that's not being represented. Understand these 2 main points. We always disclose who we represent to the party that's not being represented. When the buyers identify themselves as unrepresented, we had to make it clear that they were not representing them. So hopefully that's a good introduction to agency and that sends you in the right direction. Okay, so let's get into the chapter.